morning dua and night dua when you go to out of your when you come in when you go to bathroom, when you go to those dua, if you do, wallahi,
it will protect you.
They cannot, they doesn't have any power to you.
Right.
Even if somebody is gave to you some is not working on you, subhanAllah.
Yep. So let's continue, inshallah. وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُهُ. So what is this actually relating to? I know we kind of got out of the topic, but I think it's really important to actually understand a number of different things related to that. I don't know how we got into the other topic, but we'll still work on it, inshallah. وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم. So what is this actually relating, and how did this ayah actually get into the nafaqa? Well, it got into the nafaqa because remember the ayat that were actually before it actually talking about a nafaqa. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu anfiqu min tayyibati ma kasabtum. So it's talking about a nafaqa. What nafaqa are we talking about here? We're talking about donations in general. Now, of course, it was talking about donations in general, in where it was basically encouraging for donations and basically telling you how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pay you, will actually reward you for the donations that you are giving. And of course, we talked about what usually is keeping people from giving donations, which is usually in fear of poverty or in fear of loss. And we said how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically responding to that, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you to donate, but you should never see it as it was a form of loss, but actually a form of gain. So why is it a form of gain? By the way, the word zakat itself actually means to gain, even though technically you are losing money. Well, you're actually losing 2.5% of your savings. So how is it that you're actually gaining? So that's the thing, is that when you look at the word zakah, the word zakah actually means to increase, but it also means to purify. How are they related? So they're related because what you are increasing in is really the spirituality by letting go of what your heart and your own selfish self is always connected to. Your selfish self is connected to money, is connected to dunya, is connecting to basically keeping property. But when you give up on your property, you learn how to gain what is more important than property, and that is principle. What is the principle? The principle of giving. The principle of giving. And when you increase in the principle of giving, when you increase and you elevate yourself in the principle of giving, that is when you're actually disconnecting yourself from the love of dunya to the love of al-akhirah. So that's why you are technically going into a form of tazkiyah, purification, in where you're purifying yourself from the connection and the absolute connection to materialism, to connecting yourself with your spirituality. So that's why the ayah was emphasizing الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء. And because we are concerned about gaining materialism and concerned about, of course, property, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, shaitan is actually always making you afraid of loss. We talked about that last week, and therefore shaitan will always find ways in order to order you to find ways to gain in pleasure. And that's why he would basically order for al-fahsha. Now, the word al-fahsha is a general term to mean immorality. So why do people engage in immorality? People would engage in immorality because they fear of loss. Because they fear of loss in dunya. So that's why the ayah yu'ti al-hikmata ma yasha. What is al-hikmah? What is the wisdom here? The wisdom is actually in the vision, is in how you see and how you see the different matters that surround you. And we talked about the seeing the different matters in the DNAIM before. So وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ. So every single وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم. Now the weird thing and the beautiful thing on this page, let's actually look at the root nafaqa. The word nafaqa is the original root, and let's look at this on this page. Let's see how many times we actually have the root nafaqa on this page. We got 1, 2, and let's see some more, because just on this page we actually tunfiqu, tunfiquna, tunfiqu, and let's see. Yunfiqun. So just on this page, you actually have several, just the word nafaqa. And the word nafaqa actually means to spend, but here ma anfaqtum is basically speaking about spending for the cause of the Lord Almighty. Let's look at a number of different things here. Is that whatever you spend, min nafaqatin, so whatever you spend, and we said that the spending, that the most important spending that a person would spend is really the spending on their own family. This is really important to mention, because there are priorities. It makes no sense for you to spend on, people that are poor when you're leaving your own family actually in a very devastating situation. So, أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ. What is a nadhr? A nadhr is actually an oath. So is that actually good? Well, oath and nadhr are actually a different types. There is a difference between a nadhr and yamin. What is the difference between nadhr and yamin? I want you guys to pay attention to this one, because this is just on itself. We actually took it when we studied Kulit al-Sharia. This is actually a whole semester, but I'm going to make it in just a couple minutes. Yamin is actually one thing, and nadhr is another thing. Il-yamin, in where I would actually make yamin in 3 different situations. 1, there is a yamin in where I am actually making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be my witness. So I will say wallahi, or billahi, or tallahi. So in other words, I will say by Allah or tallahi, which basically is really the same thing. And in other words, I'm using Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name to be my witness. Now, there is the yamin al-mun'aqida, the yamin in where you actually mean it. So what does that mean? In where I really mean, if you ask me to drink water, I did. Say wallahi. Wallahi, I drink water. What if I was lying? Now, just hold on to that. Because if I said, wallahi, I did this and this, or wallahi, I will do such and such. If I said wallahi, then in that situation, this is yamin mun'aqida. Mun'aqida meaning I basically had the intention to do this oath. If I had the yamin, if I had the intention to do the oath, then in that situation, if I would break the oath, I would have to feed 10 needy people or clothe 10 needy people. And if I can't afford it, that's only if I can't afford it, would I actually fast 3 days? Okay. Now, the other type of yamin is basically called yamin ghayr al-munaqida, or it's basically the yamin in where we would just call it the laghu, Somali thing. Wallahi, wallahi. And you're like, wallahi for what? It's just a word. The other day, when my daughter was telling me that her classmate was telling her that she's actually in a public school, and she kept on hearing, the Somali boys, every time one Somali boy would tell the other one they did something, he would say wallahi. So this non-Muslim kid, another Muslim kid came to him and he said he did something. He said, like, say wallahi. So even the non-Muslims are right now embracing the say wallahi ya haram.
Kenyans do that. I thought she was homeschooled.
She goes to on Saturdays to an Islamic school.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what.
Kenyans do that now.
So
The
for
language,
laghu,
the Christian Kenyans,
Uh-huh.
they all say wallahi.
wallahi tab alhamdulillah, we got them at least the beginning of their tawheed. Now that's yamin al-laghu. For yamin al-laghu, if the person does not mean it, then there is no kafara. There is no, what is it, kafara? Expiation. The other type of yamin is basically the yamin, it's called yamin al-ghamus. What is yamin al-ghamus? Yamin al-ghamus relates to people's rights. So I would tell you, did you see me taking $50 from Zoya's bag? And you said, I did. And Zoya tells you, okay, I want you to say that you didn't, for example. Okay. So in that situation, let's say you made the yamin, this is yamin al-ghamus, and you knew that you were lying about that yamin, this is yamin al-ghamus. Is there an expiation for yamin al-ghamus? Differences of opinions between scholars. I'm making the story short because of time. What is nadhr? Nadhr is different because nadhr, you're actually, it's something between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nadhr should and must be uttered. There are different kinds of nadhr, and this was actually something that was done even before Islam. What is nadhr? I would say, wallahi, I will start praying Salat al-Duha every single day for a whole week. For example, is Salat al-Duha obligatory? No. By saying nadhr, now it's obligatory. Why? Because I said, Lillahi alay, by Allah, I will do such and such. Got it? Now it became obligatory, even though it's a sunnah. Or I made, well, Lillahi alay, I will donate to the masjid $5,000. Is donating $5,000 obligatory? No.
No.
But since I made this nadhr, now I have to.
What
What if I made a nadhr that I will donate $50,000? My house burned down. La samhallah. Something happened.
That's excusable.
All right. So in that situation, I wasn't able to do it. So what did I do? I wanted to actually implement the nadhr that I did, but I couldn't. So in that situation, I would go for kafarat al-yamin.
What is that?
The expiation of yamin, feeding 10 people, clothing 10 people, or if you can't afford it, fasting 3 days. There is another type of nadhr, which is what the Prophet ﷺ actually said, that it is only taken from al-bakhil, from the person that is selfish, from the person that is greedy. And that is the type of yamin in where the person would say, if, Ya Allah, if you were to cure my brother or sister or whatever, I will donate $3,000 to make a well for the people in Africa. If my sister is cured, or if my brother happens, or if I end up getting the job. Is that allowed? It is allowed, but the Prophet ﷺ did not recommend it. In fact, he said that it's only taken from a person that is greedy, they would only make a donation if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them something. All right. So this is another that يستخرج من البخيل, that's only taken from a person that is greedy. Go ahead, Bishara.
What about if you lost something and said, well, Allah, if you give me that, I will.
This is it. It's the same. It's not good, but you have to fulfill it. All right. So it's not recommended. It's not recommended, but you have to fulfill it. So at the end of the day, is that whether you were voluntarily giving a sadaqah or whether you were doing a nadhr, which is what we were talking about, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ. And at the end of the day is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about it. وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ. Why وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ? Who are the ظالمين? The people that don't give, the people that are living a life of greed. What about them? They are the ones that are transgressors, and they will not find any supporters. Who are the supporters that a person is supposed to be finding? Well, when you actually give, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one is the one that's actually giving you that support. All right. In tubdu as-sadaqati فنعم هي. There are actually a number of different قراءات. فنعم فنعم. There are a number of different قراءات. All right. In tubdu sadaqat. At the end of the day, it really means the same thing, in where it is a good. So in tubdu sadaqat, whether you conceal is sadaqat. In other words, you don't tell others that you actually did is sadaqah, or you reveal it, sorry. Tubdu is reveal it. Tukhfuha is to conceal it. So whether you reveal is sadaqah, other people know that you had given the sadaqah, is actually good. So whether you announce it, or whether you conceal it and you don't let anybody know about it, and you give it to the poor, it is best for you. So what is best? Is concealing or is making it public or concealing better? So there are actually differences of opinions between scholars on whether announcing for something that is obligatory, like zakah, in where anyways, you're giving zakah, everybody has to give zakah anyways. So scholars had differences of opinions on whether it would be better to announce the sadaqah or to conceal it. Why would they even have differences of opinions when we know that there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ that praised the man that he tasaddaqa bi sadaqa hatta la ta'lama shimaluhu ma anfaqat yaminu, to the point that the left hand doesn't even know what the right hand had actually made in sadaqah. So the reason why in different situations that doing that announcement of sadaqah can sometimes be better if your intention was pure and you knew that you were not doing it for any type of riya or show. So what am I doing then? You're basically doing it, for example, Zainab, she decided that we said, hey, we want to make donations for the masjid, $5,000. And Sheikh Mukhtar was announcing $5,000 for half an hour and no one said anything. So she decided, you know what? I'll be giving $5,000 just to encourage other women to do the same. And she knew that I don't worry about alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I just want it for the intention. If let's say she gave $5,000 and she announced it to encourage others to do the same. And let's just assume her niyyah was very good. She did not have not even an iota of riya. And we had Khadija say, you know what? And I'm going to give $10,000. And Bishara was like, Khadija giving 10, I'll be giving 20. All right. Let's just assume, okay? Inshallah, inshallah. All right. So with that situation, she would get the reward of encouraging Khadija, and Khadija will get the reward of encouraging Bishara, and so forth. All right. And there is a hadith, I love that hadith, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually get 3 people get the reward for one thing. In fact, he actually said that it would be 1 arrow, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually reward the person that made the arrow, the person that hit the arrow, and the person that carried or bought the arrow. For jihad, for example. Same thing for a masjid. The person that did the carpet, the person that bought the carpet, the person that donated the carpet.
All of them get the ajr.
All the people, all of them get the ajr. It's not just one.
Can you compete in sadaqah?
You can. طبعا وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون. So what was actually this, the إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء فهو خير لكم ويكفر عنكم سيئاتكم. So which one is best? وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء. And if you were to conceal it and actually give it to the poor, it is actually better for you. Why did it actually say it is better for you? So is concealing actually better? Was announcing better? We mentioned that one. Then we go into the differences of opinions between scholars on whether is it better for a sadaqah to be hidden. So that's why they said وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاء, that the sadaqah, if we're talking about a hidden sadaqah, usually something that's not obligatory, they'd actually said that it would be better for the non-obligatory, in other words, for the voluntary donations to actually be covered. In other words, not be concealed and not be public. Now let's continue. وَيُكَفِّرْ عَنْكُمْ مِنْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ. What is وَيُكَفِّر? This is not يَكْفُر. يُكَفِّر actually means to wipe. So التكفير actually means to wipe out, to erase. عنكم من سيئاتكم. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would remove or wipe away from the sins. وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرٌ. And the Lord Almighty is all knowing. بِمَا, in what you do. So let's move on because we've got a lot of different things that I really plan to talk about. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. What is the story here? Let me first give the general surface tafsir and then explain. You don't have the power to guide them, but the Lord Almighty guides whom He wills. And whoever and whatever you donate or you spend for the good cause, it is actually for your own cause, for yourself. وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. And what you actually spend for is really for or to seek the face of the Lord Almighty. I'm just giving the surface tafsir. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّ إِلَيْكُمْ. And whatever you spend will actually be compensated for you, and you will not be oppressed. Now that's too much of a surface tafsir because there is actually a story behind this. And the story behind this ayah is that some Sahaba were wondering whether it was actually permissible to spend on their non-Muslim family. And in fact, there is actually a situation where the Sahaba, specifically the Sahaba that were the residents of Medina. Now, it was a very common custom because the Jewish community in Medina was considered of an upper class, that the Sahaba, before they had become Muslim, the Arab that used to be in Medina, they actually used to keep their children and dedicate some of their children to be at the Jewish homes in order to learn at the Jewish yeshivas, the Jewish schools. And that was considered doing basically a service to their children by making them learn at the yeshivas. They were getting education, they were getting better services, and therefore their children were actually embracing Judaism. They were basically getting rabbinical studies. So later, when their parents had become Muslim, they wanted to force their children to become Muslim too. So that's when the ayah was actually revealed in where they were not permitted. لا إكراه في الدين. You are not able to force them to become Muslim. Now, here's one thing. Of course, there are a number of different things that are related to that. Yes, you can't force them into the deen, but what about paying for my children, or paying for my parents, or paying for my relatives that are not even Muslim? Can I pay for them or not? So some of those Sahaba, they actually attempted to basically cut spending on their non-Muslim relatives in order to pressure them to become Muslim. They wanted to cut spending. They're like, well, if I would cut spending, maybe they will reconsider their faith by simply feeling that their life is at stake and that their spending and their income is actually going to be, on the line here. So that's when this ayah was actually revealed. And of course, this involved a number of different people, including Sayyida Aysha, where, Asma, her mother was not even Muslim. So she was wondering, what should I do? and you had a number of different Sahaba. Should we spend on them? So the ayah was revealed. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ. You don't have the power to force somebody into guidance. But wait a minute. So how is it لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ? How is it that you don't have the power to guide them? Remember, guidance is in two ways. There is the hidayat tawfiq and there's hidayat istidlal. What is the difference? So you've got hidayat al-istidlal or hidayat al-dalal, basically al-istidlal or dalala, in where the Prophet ﷺ was basically the one to actually give them guidance. In other words, all the prophets were basically there in order to guide people. Quran and Sunnah, basically all the prophets were there in order to guide people. So what happened there? But at the end, لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ is very similar to the ayah in where they were basically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. At the end, they can choose hidayah. That's hidayah tawfiq. Hidayah tawfiq is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you to find the guidance. So there's that. The prophets and the messengers, they generally give you guidance, but they can't force you in choosing it and taking it. And that's because that's hidayah tawfiq. Now here, laysa alayka hudahum, this is basically talking about you can't force them for hidayah tawfiq. You can't force them to accept guidance. Your duty, وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ. The only duty that a prophet and messenger, or even those that are coming after them, the only duty that they have is to actually give them hidayat al-irshad. Give them the guidance of showing them and revealing the truth.
So it's tawfiq and irshad.
Tawfiq and irshad.
And tawfiq has 4 parts.
The tawfiq has 4 parts in where it's talking about the iman billah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we talked about that. All right. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. At the end of the day, وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whom He wills. What is guides whom He wills? And in other words, at the end of the day is that you can't force them. In other words, you cannot use cutting spending as a tool to prevent or to pressure people into accepting the message of Islam. So wait a minute. What about zakah? Do we pay zakah and do we pay sadaqah for non-Muslims or not? So when we're looking at the ayah, إنما الصدقات والفقراء والمساكين, 8 different groups. Is that exclusive to only Muslims, or can that be to non-Muslims as well? What do we say? So for the sadaqat, the donations, the sadaqat that are pertaining to ibadah, zakah, that is only to be given to Muslims. Why? Because it is pertaining to ibadah. And then the madhab Hanafi, they had differences of opinions on things like sadaqat al-fitr. Is it pertaining to ibadah, or is it pertaining to the general connection with sadaqat al-fitr? Because sadaqat al-fitr, they regarded that it wasn't necessarily pertaining to ibadah, but it was in order to show appreciation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving them the capacity to fast Ramadan. So by showing appreciation, in other words, it's not a particular worship, but it's actually a general appreciation. So for sadaqat al-fitr, for Hanafis, they regarded that you can give it to non-Muslims. So why not just give to non-Muslims? Sadaqah in general can be given to non-Muslims, whether it's a non-Muslim drunk person or whatever have you, doesn't matter, okay? But when it relates to ibadah, especially zakah, there are certain things in where it was supposed to bring in a special type of a religious obligation. It's a special type of a religious obligation. And this religious obligation was supposed to do more than actually giving for the sake of giving. It was supposed to build in another religious dynamic. All right. And that's why when we're looking at zakah, it can only be given for the 8 categories that are Muslim. Are you guys with me? Or are you lost? But can I give sadaqah in general? Sadaqah in general, go ahead and donate to non-Muslims. That's okay. Okay. Can I stop a sadaqah from somebody, for example, you're spending on, this young lady right there, but you know that she's using this money to basically get CBD and meth and whatever it's called and all these different things. And you're like, no, I'm not going to give it to her because yes, she's buying food and stuff, but she's also using it on the wrong items too. You can actually use that as a method if you knew that that method was going to give her basically a good lesson by reducing the funding of what she's spending on the wrong things.
Buy food and give them food.
Or buy food and give them food if they don't know how to use the funds. Okay. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ. At the end of the day, is that whatever you give, don't see yourself as the upper class. Because at the end of the day, is that whatever you give is actually coming back to you. In other words, don't feel superior and think that because you are giving, you are the upper hand and that the other person is on the lower hand and inferior. But remember that it's basically coming back to you. In other words, you see that the giving is actually because you need to give, because money has actually had some form of a bad impact on you without you recognizing. In other words, you needed to do more spirituality. You needed to do more cleansing because you have more money. And it's really strange. There is a hadith in Muwatta Malik in where the hadith actually speaks of the poor entering Jannah before the rich. Although there's a debate, between scholars on that, but it's really interesting. And some scholars actually use that hadith within this context and said, وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّ إِلَيْكُمْ. That at the end of the day is that the person that is of an upper class or richer, that their connection with dunya is more. So that's why they need to work on themselves more. It's really strange.
That makes sense, though. It makes sense.
It's interesting. So the people that are richer, their connection with dunya is more. So that's why they need to work more on giving, because their connection with dunya is more. So if your connection with dunya is more, that means your connection with akhirah is less. It's by default.
Yes.
All right. If your connection with dunya is more, that means your connection with akhirah is less. If your connection with akhirah is less, then you're asking me to give because by default, you are really labeling me technically that I need to work more on my deen.
But you need the labor to balance.
At the end of the day, this is, something. This is not in order to be, it's like, okay, I'm judging you or her or myself or whatever. At the end of the day is that, when we say somebody is more susceptible to fitna, whether we're talking about female, rich, boy, male, whatever it is, all right? When we say somebody is more susceptible to fitna, this is not to be judgmental, but this is actually to tell you, hey, you are more susceptible to fitna. There is something you need to work on. You see what I mean? Same thing when we say women are more susceptible to fitna, it's not being misogynist here. It's basically saying, hey, listen, you are more susceptible. You need to actually work on certain more tools. In fact, you need to work harder. That's the same thing even with the Prophet ﷺ. When he actually said, I saw most of the people in Jannah were actually women. It's not that he was being a misogynist. We're actually from women. Why did he actually say that? So they were wondering. She said, oh, تكفرنا العشير, تكثرنا اللعن وتكفرنا العشير. He was basically telling her that this is something that you have a habit of. Now, if you look at, if you look at the hadith in where تكثرنا اللعن وتكفرنا العشير, when does that actually happen? That usually happens when a person, when do they damn things? When do they تكفرنا العشير, where they would deny somebody is doing any good? It's usually when a person has a negative vision of everything that's surrounding them. And we as women, psychology actually says that we are more susceptible to depression than men. Mhm.
Yeah,
So would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually hold us accountable for something that He created the tools for? We get our cycle, we get all the different hormonal imbalances that's making us more susceptible to psychological imbalances, and of course more prone to depression and who knows all those different things and what they can cause. Well, at the end of the day, you still have the cognitive skills right there. So you can't claim that you had lost your cognitive ability. It's still there because you were capable of thinking, and you definitely knew how to respond to your husband and start snapping at him. You definitely knew how to do it, all right? But you could see right there in where when the Prophet ﷺ actually said that, he was basically telling us we are prone to that. He just wanted to let us know of something about our own makeup, our own character, that we are actually prone to something and that we have to be careful about it. That not because you may be more susceptible to having negative thoughts about yourself or about the world around you, it doesn't actually give you the permission to actually act in a way that is harmful to others or to the deen, or losing your deen. At the end of the day, is that you've got a responsibility towards the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, right there, وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. At the end of the day, is that in order to get rewarded for it, it must be ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. It must be for the sake of the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you look at the word, the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it's really important to keep in mind that we don't engage in any form of anthropomorphism or any form of connecting tashbih. What is that? In other words, when you say wajhillah, the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is not whatsoever in where we would imagine that the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has any form or any hudud or any form of a boundary. So why not? Well, that's because the second that you put a boundary to the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're limiting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second that you actually put an image, that's when you had actually put a limit, you had put a shape, you had put a form that is degrading the Lord Almighty's magnificence. So when we say wajhillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does that actually mean? At the end, we leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّ إِلَيْكُمْ. And whatever you give, it will actually يُوَفَّ إِلَيْكُمْ. It will be rewarded. In other words, it will be given back to you. That is the reward. وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُظْلَمُونَ. Why وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُظْلَمُونَ? Because the person was actually giving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the end of the day is that when the person is giving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are the ones to actually get the reward for it if they had إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. It is all based on the intention itself. لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الَّذِينَ أُحْصِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Inshallah, we need to finish the page. All right, you guys? I know.
Yes.
لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الَّذِينَ أُحْصِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. What is the story here? لِلْفُقَرَاء, for the poor that were, I'm going to first read the word in general. للفقراء الذين أحصروا في سبيل الله, for the poor that were أحصروا, it's like they were they were caged or they were prevented from going for the sake of the Lord Almighty, and they're not capable of traveling on earth. And for the rich, they would actually think of them because of their ignorance about the situation. They would see them by judging just the general appearance, and they would not ask the people for any form of help. They would judge them as they were rich. And وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِعَلِيمٍ. And whatever you donate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowing of it. Well, here's one thing. This ayah, by reading it like that, is not at all giving the meaning that what really the context of it. What is the context? So the context was there were a group of Sahaba that were called Ahl al-Suffa. Who are Ahl al-Suffa? So Ahl al-Suffa were basically, the numbers were fluctuating. Sometimes they would be 10, 300. So the numbers were fluctuating. Who were they? They were basically the homeless Sahaba, that most of them that migrated from Mecca, but not necessarily only from Mecca, that migrated to Mecca because it was obligatory on all Muslims to migrate to Medina, but they had no home to stay in. They couldn't afford homes, they couldn't afford food and water, so they ended up basically finding no shelter but a certain corner in the masjid. So those Sahaba, many times they found themselves, one, they were basically learning from the Prophet ﷺ because their place of residence, all right, was actually in the masjid itself. So what do we say the masjid? I want you to get an idea of the masjid. So here's the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ's homes were actually right next to the masjid. In fact, it was actually right next to the masjid to the point that the Prophet ﷺ would be in the masjid to tell his wives, give me like the prayer mat to pray on. And his Sayyidah Aysha said, Inni ha'id. She said, I have my period. And the Prophet ﷺ said, but your period is not in your hand. Or he told her, Nawilin al-Khumra. Why did she say that? Well, she thought she couldn't enter the masjid or even touch the prayer mat because she had her period. So you could see that it was literally door to door. So you had some Sahaba that were actually literally sleeping in the masjid, and the masjid did not have a roof. In some areas, they did have a roof, but they also did not have sides. So a lot of the Ahl al-Suffa guys, Sahaba, were actually lacking water, lacking food, lacking shelter, and many times didn't even have enough clothes. So in fact, those Sahaba, many times they would actually have a piling, literally a whole layer of sand on their skin because they didn't even have enough water to bathe. Some of these Sahaba were basically the ones to participate in jihad because, hey,
why am I even here?
well, they were learning from the Sahaba. And amongst from Ahl al-Suffa is none other but Abu Hurairah, who is one of the most famous. Abu Hurairah was actually part of Ahl al-Suffa. Abu Hurairah was actually part of Ahl al-Suffa. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, ironically, was actually part of Ahl al-Suffa, but he was a rich guy. He was a millionaire before, and he was a person that was like, just show me off the market and I'll start my own business. Started out his own business, and short period of time, he was a millionaire already. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, millionaire already. He was ready to go up. But not everyone was like that. Okay. Anyhow, so what happened is that this is uhsiru fi sabilillah. This is actually, even though, so this is lil fuqara, all right, in where people did not always recognize that they were actually in need, and they were engaging fi sabilillah, they were engaging in jihad. And لا يستطيعون ضربا في الأرض. لا يستطيعون ضربا في الأرض is actually literally supposed to mean that they're not capable of traveling for business. But this is actually not talking about business. But this is actually talking about they're not capable of actually engaging in getting a job, basically. يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء. Those that are ignorant of their situation, they would actually think that these people are rich. But why would they actually think that they were rich? Why did they think that they were rich? من التعفف. Why did they think that they were rich? Really, not because they necessarily had clothes that made them appear that they were rich, but you would think that they were rich because they're telling you, oh, no, I'm very good. Thank you so much. They're just,
They don't need anything.
they're showing satisfaction. They're showing satisfaction, even though تعرفهم بسيماهم, you would recognize that I know they need help. I know they need the support. I know they can't afford it. تعرفهم بسيماهم. But why did I think that they didn't need that? Because they were showing iffah, satisfaction. They were showing that, thank you, alhamdulillah, wallah, I have everything. You would ask her, wallah, alhamdulillah, and we'll give you all this, but you know that she's probably starving. Just like Abu Hurairah. Look at this, you guys. Abu Hurairah goes to, he was so hungry. He says he was so hungry. So what did he do? He went to Umar ibn al-Khattab. He was like, I'll go pretend that I have a question. And that way, you know, he could probably invite me to a meal or something. So he goes to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq just answers the question and goes on. All right. So then he says, he goes to Umar al-Khattab. Umar al-Khattab just answers the question, moves on. So then he says, I'll go to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He goes to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq just answers the question, moves on. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ is the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knew that he wasn't concerned about the question. He was hungry. So he invited him over to eat. So the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invited him over to eat. So he comes over and starts learning, you know, just different things. It's amazing. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, he ta'arifuhum bisimahum, was able to recognize. He knew what he was going through. He knew what he was going through. The stories of Ahl al-Sufa are just amazing. لا يسألون الناس إلحافا. They would not ask people, what is ilhafa? Even when they were to ask, they're not constant in asking. They might say, do you have do you think I could get some support in this in any way? But they don't keep on asking. They'll ask it once and then they'll stay quiet about it. They won't be constant because they'll put their honor on top of everything. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ. At the end of the day, whatever you spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it. There is actually a story. In where, inshallah, we'll say it next week. Just tell me about the story of Ahl al-Sufa. I need to finish the page and I could see you guys. All right, we'll say it, inshallah. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً. So at the end of the day is that, let's see. Now the ayat are giving me the different circumstances. The first circumstance is spending in cases of a general nafaqah, and then in situations where I'm concealing or revealing the sadaqah, in situations where these people are not even Muslim, in situations where the people are not constantly asking, and then in situations where I'm actually doing it throughout the night and throughout the day. So this is telling me the different circumstances. And in the end, is that the ayah was actually saying it in general. In general. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً. Those that would spend from their money throughout the night or throughout the day, in private or in public, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually give them their reward. And their Lord Almighty will give them their reward, and they will not find no fear and no sorrow. So what is that? Dawu mardakum bisadaqat. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, if you want to also find healing for your loved ones, or if you want to keep away calamities, use sadaqah as a method. How is sadaqah supposed to be a method to actually help in that in any way? It's basically in order for you, instead of looking at the calamity, you're looking at the power of all, where you're connecting to the one, the Lord Almighty, the one to control everything. You're connecting to the Lord Almighty. Rather than focusing on the calamity, you're focusing on the one that controls whether the evil things or the good things, and you're looking at the power of the Lord Almighty. So now you're redirecting your vision from the pain to the Lord Almighty, from seeing illness to seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the one to cure, from seeing poverty to seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a razaq, from seeing weakness to seeing that the power is in Allah Almighty, and so forth. I actually wanted to go further, but every single time it just takes hours. I really wanted to continue with Ayat al-Riba, but next week, inshallah, we'll be talking about interest, inshallah. Trust me, I would continue, but haram. Tell you this next week, inshallah, because I just recognize it's 8:05, but remind me next week, inshallah. Sorry. I'll let you guys stay tuned next week. It was really nice. I think I'll tell you part of the story. Part of the story.
It's Friday night.
All right. Friday. Oh. It's not the 13th. We can do.
Can you share the gin document? I'm gonna test myself.
I will. Hold on. Allah yahmik ya Rab.
Please tell us. Because we're gonna forget next month.
No, don't worry. I'll remind you. What? My mom is constantly calling me, and I'm just wondering what's going on. She already called me like 5 times or 6 times. I'm not sure what's going on. No. So if there are any questions really quick before we leave, I'll be happy to answer it, inshallah.
I was out when we did the last ayah.
You would, oh, okay. So inshallah, we will continue next week. Inshallah, remind me of Ahl Sufa and remind me the bag of dates that only had one date. Okay, the bag of dates that only had one date.
I know we're gonna forget.
All right, the bag of dates that only had one date, and Ahl Sufa were eating from it. All right, so we'll see you all, inshallah. All right, inshallah, we'll see you all next week. And if there are any questions, even from the people online, I'd be happy to answer it as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Salam.
Utendi, you wanted to say something. Go ahead, my dear.
Yes, I have a question,
I
but
can't
it's
hear you,
not,
Utendi.
no,
So
it's not related to
Utendi,
the surah we
I
are.
can barely hear you.
Yeah, I'm in the car, but can you hear me now?
I'm not sure, Utendi, why I can't hear you, my dear.
Yeah.
So I'll do this. Hold on. Okay, Utendi, try again.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now. Go ahead, my dear.
Okay, so I have a question, but it's not related to the surah, so I don't know if I can ask it now.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a sister was wondering, a sister, she was wondering if she's being a nurse, if she can work in a place where they treat the cosmetologists, where they treat the lip bumping and all the new I don't even know how to say it, plastic surgery, something like that. Yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah, there's nothing wrong with working in that, because there are there are different situations. So not every plastic surgery is necessarily haram.
Yeah, I first of all said no. Then I was like, Subhanallah, maybe I should verify it. So,
So that's their
yeah.
responsibility to research whether they are permitted to do that particular plastic surgery. So your situation, for example, let's say you are, let's say, let's say a technician, a lab technician, or let's say a nursing assistant or something like that. You don't have to look into the cases, and this is not your responsibility. So to work in those clinics is actually permissible because it's their responsibility to ask whether they are permitted to do that particular procedure or not. You see what I'm saying? That's not your responsibility because in general, plastic surgery, some of it is halal and some of it is haram. So the responsibility lies on the person to research whether in their situation, it is permissible to do that particular procedure or not. You don't have to ask about it. And if you are a nursing assistant or whether you are, let's say, a technician, or that's okay. That's not your responsibility to ask. I hope I answered that question. All right, everyone. Well, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Khadija came early, she was just with the
Khadija came early, so what does that mean?